On this week's episode of Nintendo Noise, we're talking all about Nintendo Switch 2 pre-orders launching in America this week, and we try to answer the question, has Nintendo done enough to sell Nintendo Switch 2? What's up, Internet? You're tuning to episode 180 of Nintendo Noise, Slipscreen Games' weekly Nintendo podcast. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined today by my very good friends and co-hosts, Mr. Ken Hicks.
What it do?
And Mr. Jack Ryan.
Good to be back, baby.
Welcome back to the show, Jack. Good to have you back, man.
Thank you.
And you're having a good week. It's Nintendo Switch 2 pre-order week.
Sideline for a couple of weeks, missed the entire launch window.
Yeah, it's a good time to be
waiting about 2 years for. So happy to catch up with you guys.
Yeah, perfect week for you to get back into the mix on this one. Of course, Nintendo Switch 2 pre-orders go live this week, and I think there's excitement in the air, but it's certainly not unmitigated excitement, which is kind of what I want to talk about a little bit this week, right? Because we got the confirmation we won't get a price hike on Nintendo Switch 2 as pre-orders are going live. It literally, by the time you're listening to this, it'll be tonight, right? Or tomorrow, I guess, if you're a patron. And that's great, but obviously accessories are not faring quite as well. And I think that if you're somebody that was planning on buying some of those accessories, of taking full advantage of what Nintendo Switch 2 has to offer, you might be looking at a little bit of sticker shock when you go to check out. And I want to kind of talk about how that perceived affordability of the original Nintendo Switch being the cheapest console on the market and everything, and how that really gave it an edge, and whether or not that not being a value prop for Nintendo Switch 2 might end up, hurting it in the long run, or at least maybe out the gate. But before we really bite into this topic, I do want to kick things off with an icebreaker for the listeners, and I want to ask the question, are you pre-ordering Nintendo Switch 2? And I would love for everybody to jump down in the comments and let me know if you're outside of North America, have you already gotten a pre-order? If you haven't gotten one, are you did you miss it and you're maybe waiting for Wave 2 that's rolling out in the UK this week? Or if you live in the United States, are you planning on pre-ordering one this week? And if yes, what motivated you to pre-order? And if no, what could Nintendo have done to change your mind? And what were you looking for that you didn't get? Because I feel like there's so many varying opinions, I think, when it comes to hype levels for the console right now, that I'm very interested in hearing where people are at and getting a bit of a temperature check from the community. So let us know in the comments what you're thinking. So we got the confirmation on the 18th, right? 24th of April. That's when we're going to get our pre-orders in US and Canada. We got confirmation that both hardware and software would be safe from price hikes. And we got confirmation of kind of the individual plans for everybody's pre-orders, right? Best Buy, I think, looking like your best option because they are going to be doing midnight pre-orders and then midnight pre-sale, right? Or I guess not pre-sale, pickup, right? You'll be able to do a midnight release of the console at a Best Buy. So I think that's, for me, the one that I'm shooting for. Have you guys developed your pre-order plan yet? Do you know which retailer you're going to be shooting for, or is it scattershot approach?
So I'm just going to have my dual monitor set up, 3 things on each screen with my phone, and just aggressively hit refresh. So over the last few years, I got really into Pokemon cards, right? So I know how shit these bots are. They're just suck them up and then sell them online for twice the price. So you can't put all of your eggs in one basket. Ideally, yeah, Best Buy, they guarantee you'll get it on launch day. And historically, I've had really good luck with them, right? With them coming out the day they say they're going to come out. But, if I end up getting the order through Walmart or Target, then it is what it is. But question, didn't Nintendo say they're going to have pre-orders on their website? But you have to have Nintendo online and be a certain number of hours played or something like that?
You would have to have signed up with interest to buy it and have an account that needs to exist for a certain amount of time, have I think 50 hours of like playtime logged, and then you would get an email invite 72 hours ish or something like that prior.
There's a few other stipulations on there. I think you need to have had like 12 months worth of Nintendo Switch Online, and there might be one other like small caveat in there. Any like heavy Nintendo Switch user, I'm sure, meets all the criteria, but
is it too late to sign up for that?
It's not too late to sign up. I'm not entirely sure how it works. Pete, you might know. I don't know if it's a lottery or if it's a priority system.
I believe they said it was a first come, first served situation. So I think you probably can still sign up, but if you were to do so, I think your chances of getting invited at this point are probably pretty slim.
Yeah, and if it makes you feel better, Ken, I'm pretty sure they're announcing those who were chosen in like early May. So pre-ordering through a retailer is still, I believe, the fastest option, as far as I'm aware.
Fair.
Yeah. I think that's right. Yeah, like I signed up for that like the day that they opened it, and I'm not holding my breath that I will be chosen to do so.
Yeah, just based on how it seems like Nintendo's taking some smart steps, but I'm just remembering how the PS5 went. Sony had like a similar queue, and it was an absolute like madhouse. So
yeah,
we'll
right.
see how
and
Nintendo fares.
I was in the same boat of that. Like I signed up, I did all my intent, I just didn't make it through, and it didn't happen for me. You know?
Oh, am I the only one who got it on launch day?
I got it on launch day.
No,
but
I did. We all did.
I just,
but it was not smooth sailing.
Yeah, and I didn't get it from PlayStation. I literally, it was the day that they did the like full reveal, and they were like, "We're going to be doing pre-orders tomorrow," and I literally just went to my local GameStop and was like, "Can I pre-order the PS5?" And he was like, "Yeah, screw it." So I just went the day before anybody else thought they could and lucked out.
Shout out, checked out GameStop employees. We appreciate you.
They're the real ones.
Are you gonna try to like have lightning strike twice and just go into GameStop tomorrow, see what happens?
I might roll the dice on it. Like I might go and see if I can ask that same. Oh, you know what? That GameStop closed. I'd have to go to a different one, so maybe my odds won't be so good. But it might be worth a shot. GameStop is doing a similar deal where like online pre-orders will open at midnight, and then you can get them as soon as doors open in store, and every store has like an allotment of a certain number of units, obviously. So that's another one worth trying, I think. If you don't end up getting like the midnight option at Best Buy or GameStop, then, heading to your local GameStop is probably your next best bet. But that you might be running into a situation too where like other dorks are there early waiting in line, and,
Yeah, and we can move on, but I'll just mention for the listeners, I think Walmart is the other retailer that's doing midnight online pre-orders. So
they also have
to mention that in case anyone's listening for information on where to get it.
They have a cool little tidbit there as well, that if you do order it online, they are promising that you will get your unit by 9 a.m. on release day, which
that's fresh.
Is nice. Yeah, if you are going to go the online route, if for whatever reason you like can't get to a store or, or just don't want to go deal with a crowd or whatever, but also don't want to waste launch day waiting for your console to show up, then sounds like Walmart's probably your best bet. I would say Target is the clear one to avoid because there's no midnight pre-release. There's no midnight ability to get a pre-order that day, and there is no other like added benefit or promise of it showing up or whatever. So that to me looks like a pretty clear last resort. But PSA for you if you're in North America looking to pre-order this week. And it's also worth giving a little bit of information that I saw Bloomberg report, which is that Nintendo has gotten as many as 2 million units into the U.S. From the Vietnam distributor. So there are a good number, right, available. And like I think if you're there at midnight, you should probably have a pretty easy time getting your hands on one. But I also wouldn't expect them to be readily available for more than the first couple days that pre-order is open. I wouldn't be surprised if they become unavailable within a few hours. So if you are really trying to get one day and date, I would do your best to be up at midnight.
So just for like giggles, I looked up to see how many Nintendo Switches sold in the first week. Um, OG Switch, and it sold 1.5 million units worldwide, including 500,000 in the US. So if they have 2 million in the US, that's 4 times the stock. So I'm hoping it'll be easier. I'm
It should
optimistic.
Yeah,
definitely be easier than it was to get a Nintendo Switch 1. But you remember how unavailable they became very quickly.
yeah. Probably a little apples to oranges, just because like the Switch 2 is now a proven thing, but also there's the pricing of it. Like, is that going to box some people out? So it'll be interesting to see. I'm not sure if we can look at the Switch 1 and say like this is how the Switch 2 is going to go based on how many units.
Yeah.
But I agree, just based off what we know in terms of like launch stock, it'll probably be easier than it was with the Switch 1, which was if you did not get one on day one, you did not have one for a while. Unless you were like the most adamant guy calling your local Best Buy 10 times a day.
Yeah. Yeah, like
Hopefully it's better than that.
I know most of my friends that were not day one adopters were like still looking for one, for 2-3 months after release, and it was very much a like luck of the draw. You would go to whatever stores in your town, and you caught one in the wild and you got one,
Yeah. So moral of the story for listeners, if you're on the fence, pre-order. You can always cancel it. But don't, if you think you might want it, get your foot in the door rather than risk being out of luck for, 3 or 4 months potentially, depending on how this thing goes.
And I think there's also always like the caveat there that if you happen to get a pre-order and change your mind, it's like you probably have a friend that wants one, right? Or like somebody, you can jump on our Discord and, give it to somebody in the community or something like that.
Scalp it to your friends, make a little profit.
No, at cost. This is a friendly scalping situation.
Little 25%. No one's gonna mind.
little 10% off the top. Little 10% for the government, 10% for me.
Something for daddy.
So let's talk about the less fun part here, right? We were all stoked to hear that the console was not going to go up in price, but seeing that pretty much every accessory now has gotten a between $5 and $10 price increase is definitely pretty significant.
Yeah, because let's be real. Who here was even interested in the Switch 2 camera to begin with? And then they raised the price? Even in the trailer. Even in the trailer where they're having like, oh, you can see your friends as they game, and it just shows like the game's running in 15 frames per second at the bottom screen. They did not do a good job selling that camera. Yeah. So and the Switch 2 is expensive enough as is, right? Even though I believe the console itself is fairly priced for what you're getting, it doesn't change the fact that it's expensive. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Especially in this day and age. And also, if you're a diehard trying to get the Switch 2 on launch, right? You have a Switch 1. No one's going for a Switch 2 who doesn't have a Switch 1. And a lot of the accessories for the Switch 1 will work with the Switch 2. Even though the new Pro Controller is better than my Pro Controller, I'm not necessarily trying to get the new Pro Controller day one when I have a perfectly functional one.
It's not $85 better, right? Like that's the thing is, like I would have been down for an upgrade, but looking at all these price points, it's like, yeah, I mean, I'll definitely wait on some of this stuff. And I mean, some of it I might not ever pull the trigger on,
Yeah. Well, surprisingly, like, I tend to lean toward the cynical side of stuff. And with this one, I'm kind of relieved with how it shook out. And I think it was pretty thoughtful by Nintendo in a way. I'll say that I don't know how... Let me add a disclaimer. I don't know how these tariffs affect their bottom line. Like, I don't know what their need to make amount is. I don't know what their want to make amount is. I don't know what their like above and beyond smashing success number is. I don't know how these tariffs get in the way of it. I do know that it's nice that the system is not increasing in price. I think by taxing the accessories, you don't box out any kids who are just like, I really want to Switch 2 for my birthday. You can still get one for the same price. We're not looking at like, now it's $60 more and mom and dad cannot afford it.
Right.
I think there's now a tax for like the diehard people who need a second set of Joy-Cons on launch day or need the new Pro Controller. And for them, like that extra money is probably worth it because they are diehard Nintendo fans. They need everything as soon as it comes out. For them, the price is probably not that much of a difference. I think for like the masses, the stuff that they were planning to buy is the same price it was. So in terms of like how this thing could have looked, I'm actually a bit relieved, and I think it's probably best case scenario given what we know.
This situation, and also I was talking to Pete about this a couple of days ago. Even if Nintendo takes a hit on like the console itself because of the tariffs that they weren't expecting, most of the time, not most of the time, all the time, video game companies make their money from selling the games, right? Like they might break even or even lose a little bit of money on the console, but the second they buy 1 or 2 games, they make their money back and it's all profit from there.
You're correct. Just to offer a slight clarification, or I guess I could just like an interesting factoid. Nintendo Switch is one of the few consoles that bucked that trend where Nintendo did actually turn a profit on the base unit at $300 because it was just so cheap to make because it was already old tech when they were rolling it out. So the fact that it was always profitable and never got a price cut is fucking insane. It's really insane. It's like unprecedented in that regard. So not to say that you're wrong, that like Nintendo Switch was an outlier in that regard, and it seems like they are probably more in line with that model with this unit.
Yes. So maybe they went from making a profit on each Switch 2 to either breaking even or a slight loss, but that would be better than raising the price of the Switch 2, pricing people completely out, and then therefore losing out on additional software sales. They want to start and keep building the momentum, especially if we don't know where these tariffs are going to go. Like things can go south. Who knows what the Orange Man's going to do?
And you don't want to create an environment where then you can like have people spinning the narrative that the console's underperforming, right? Because then that will also create, it just creates a yet another narrative that you then need to counter, right? And that you need to show that it's healthy and that people are there making things for it and that people are there buying it. And, you don't want to end up in a 3DS situation, which we'll talk about more.
Yeah. So as crazy as $92 or $95 Joy-Cons is, I forget which of the two it is. It's somewhere in there.
Yeah. It's the Pro Controller's $84.99. The Joy-Cons are $94.99, which is wild.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy on paper, right? I'm relatively okay with the accessory pricing hike for the reasons I mentioned. I'm sorry.
I think you're right that it was the right way to go. If it's one or the other.
The other side of it, which we knew before, pre-orders were pulled, is the $80 potentially norm for what Nintendo considers its premium or like super premium IP. Mario Kart World was $80 at announcement. That hasn't changed. So I think that's the other side of the conversation, and that's the side that I'm less thrilled about, personally.
Yeah, I know we're not really here to talk about the Direct, but I would love to chat about that a little bit, just because I think that's something that, Jack, you and I talked about offline while you were away the last couple of weeks, that like, Nintendo kind of sold us this idea that like, oh, wait until you see the Direct, like that's gonna prove why this game is worth $80. And I think, not to take anything away from how good that game looks, I don't think that was what that Direct delivered, right?
It was an extended version of what we already knew. I agree. The game looks great. Looks like a great Mario Kart sequel. That is about all I can say. It looks like what I would expect from Mario Kart 9. So yeah, it was strange that they kind of reacted to the strong backlash about the price by saying, like, you guys don't get it. Wait until you see like what we have to show, and then you'll understand like this is a value. And then we saw the Direct, and it was more or less what we already saw and what we already knew. So it was a bit odd. I think I'm okay with $80 games if they're like above and beyond great. Mario Kart World feels like an odd one to introduce it because I'm not sure that the wow factor is there.
Yeah, and I think the big thing here is like the whiplash from the Switch 1 to the Switch 2 in terms of pricing of everything. They went from being the cheapest thing on the market to being the first gaming company to push $80 video games as the standard base. And
Yeah, we were paying $60 for Switch games. I know people are going to point to Tears of the Kingdom and say they already introduced that. Like, it was one game. It was introduced to us as kind of an exception. And again, they added commentary and said, like, we're charging this much because this was like an above and beyond effort that we know you're going to feel when you play it. Like, you're going to understand why we had to charge more. So that was not the norm. So it's not a $10 increase in my book. It's a $20 increase on, I don't know what games they're going to stick that $80 tag on. I would guess like the 3D Mario is a safe bet, whatever the next entry in the mainline series is.
I think that's the part about the pricing that rubs me the wrong way the most, is that it's just a total lack of transparency about what those delineations exist to mean, right? Especially when you think about that save for Tears of the Kingdom. They were charging $60 for basically everything on Nintendo Switch, regardless of what its budget was or how much time you were going to get out of it or the scope. And it's frankly insane that games like Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey, right, cost the same amount as like Princess Peach Showtime or Kirby Star Allies and nothing against those games, but games that I think in previous generations would have been $40 handheld games, right, were sold at the $60 price point. So to see them come out and be like, DK Bonanza is a $70 game, which, we have now kind of collectively accepted is the norm for a AAA game. What makes that different than Mario Kart? Is it length? Is it post-launch roadmap? Is it like, is it that you intend to continue working on this game and supporting it, therefore it costs a little bit more because I'm gonna have things to do in it? Or is it's a multiplayer game that you'll spend over 100 hours in, so it's worth $80, right? Like,
it's just,
what is the mentality?
Like, I read some of the comments, and it was along the lines of, when we look at our games, we look at like the relative value to the customer and we price it accordingly. Which fine, but you've never done that before. And they're talking about it like it's always been the way they approach things.
Right.
Like, for as long as I've been conscientious of what video games cost, which is probably the GameCube era, is when I actually like started looking at sticker prices. It's always been the same price across the board, industry standard for first party titles. So it's just weird that they're introducing this like cultural pricing is like, something we look at and evaluate based on the game, because it's coming out of nowhere. You've never done this, and that's what's odd. And they're telling us like very matter-of-factly that this is how they operate as a company, and it's coming out of nowhere. To your point, it's just a lack of transparency, Pete, and I think it's some mixed messaging.
And it makes you wonder, like, I don't envision a world where this is them saying like, oh, we're going to explore the price point, and like some games will be like, it's like, right? Like, it's like my assumption is that almost every game is going to cost $70 and then some others will cost even more, right? Whereas like that's a real sticking point for me with some of these games. Like, I'm not paying $70 for a Kirby Star Allies or a Princess Peach Showtime or whatever. I'm just not. So if this is a signal that like we're gonna exist in a world where there are, maybe $20 to $40 games from Nintendo, like Famicom Detective Club last year was like a budget, smaller indie type title that they put out, okay? And then maybe some of those games stay at that $60 price point, right? And then the single player, more tight experiences will be $70, and then the longer tail stuff that is in development for a longer time and they expect you'll get more value of is $80. Okay, maybe, but to your point, we have no precedent for that, and we have a ton of precedent of them overcharging for games and then never ever dropping their prices.
Yeah. And I want to be very careful about like preemptively defending the corporation because bad things happen when you give them the benefit of the doubt, usually in this industry.
Capitalism, baby.
I do think, like, at least on paper, there is the potential for upside to the consumer, in the form of, if we can sell Mario Kart World for $80, maybe that allows us to price a Princess Peach Showtime at $50 instead of the $60 it launched at. A game that I felt deserved to sell more, was probably not very didn't sell as well because I think of that standard $60 price tag. Strategically, I think there's room for it to be a good thing and for it to actually be what they say it is, which is putting an appropriate price tag on games. Precedent tells us it's probably Nintendo. PR spinning, just putting a premium on their games out of nowhere. But
I do want to believe that you're right, though, because this is a conversation that Ken and Sierra and I had a couple of episodes ago about this idea of like, would you ever be willing to spend like say $100 on a game if it was like you knew what the promise was, right? Like, and I think that Ken made a lot of really good points about like they could take that money and the game could flop, and then you don't see any of that content, or it comes out in a different form than what you expected, and you're better off as a consumer paying for a finished product as like a DLC update or a season pass or something like that, rather than paying upfront for the promise of more. And I generally agree with that. I think the only pushback I would offer is I look at the way that Nintendo has, I think, historically failed to support multiplayer games after launch, and the fact that like, a game like Splatoon, right? Splatoon 2 comes out, it has its whole life cycle, it basically ends, right? And then there's kind of a dormant period, and then Splatoon 3 comes out, and it's not really a meaningful sequel. It's kind of just more of Splatoon 2. And I think if that was any other video game publisher, Splatoon would be a platform, and it would be a game that you put out, and then we have a roadmap for how we're going to support it over the entire course of the console, right? And that it's a game that like will have, every month there'll be a Splatfest that is like a big event, and you'll get an exclusive piece of gear for participating in it, and you'll have dailies that you can check off, and you'll have a season pass that you're working through, and that sort of thing. And I think it's hard to look at games like that and how, I think, at least for me, they fail to connect and to keep me engaged, because it's very easy to feel like you've kind of seen all it has to offer very quickly, and then the only real loop to keep you in the ecosystem is just playing the game over and over and over again, which is fine. But when there are literally dozens and dozens and dozens of online multiplayer games that constantly have updates, I think it makes those games seem a little dated. And I would be interested to see if, and again, we have no indication that this is the case. So I think I'm, again, like you said, Jack, maybe giving them benefit of the doubt where it's not deserved. But I look at Mario Kart and the fact that Mario Kart had 2 seasons of DLC over the course of its 10-year life cycle that made that game have a ton of content and a ton of reasons to keep going back to it. If that's what we're getting because I spent $80, then I am with you that like that is actually beneficial to the consumer, and that it's better for the health of Mario Kart as a game to have a consistent amount of content rolling out over a period of time, rather than coming out, you unlock everything, and then you forget about it until they are like, there's DLC, get back into it, and you're out of the rhythm of playing it already. And that is, we know that there's a lot of data that points to the fact that like people don't play DLC as much as they play the base game, right? Whereas if it's a free update and it's constantly happening, and maybe if it's once a month, if it's once a week, you're jumping in to play, or every day to do dailies, then that's how you keep a game like that healthy and alive. And that does cost money. And I think we all hate microtransactions, and we hate season passes, and we hate being nickeled and dimed. And if this is the way that they can justify that, then maybe that does make sense. But that's giving them a ton of rope to hang themselves with. And, Nintendo gonna Nintendo.
So all I'm going to say is that when Splatoon 4 comes out and it's a free-to-play Battle Pass game, you're to blame for putting this idea into the universe.
Honestly, I think it's a perfect model for Splatoon.
I think that's what it needs to be to actually be successful, though.
Like, ironically, the one time I want games as a service, it's with these opportunities that Nintendo is blowing with these weird models. So yeah, I wasn't even thinking of it as like a game as a service premium. I was kind of viewing it as like a larger, when Nintendo feels like they have a premium game, it's $80. So I'm even more kind of let's wait and see based off what you said, Pete.
Yes, keep
I
glazing,
think it's an
Daddy
interesting
Nintendo.
point. Yeah.
Again, I'm not defending them. I'm offering a potential interpretation. I want to be so
all
clear.
we know about their approach to online multiplayer is they don't do it like anyone else. So this might be the latest round of them trying something different and seeing if they can kind of establish their own business model and sustainability model for it.
Y'all are huffing on the hopium. Okay,
I
appreciate it.
You're right, but I
saying.
appreciate you saying hopium and not copium because I do think there's a chance that this is what's happening.
Also, I just feel that there's enough counter opinion out there. The reasons to not be happy about it are quite obvious and they're quite easy to find. So
it's worth exploring.
Why not entertain instead of being just outright angry about it? Entertain that we could see something interesting come out of this, but obviously, by all means, use your own judgment. Let's see how this thing plays at launch. Let's see what their plans are to support it, and we'll go from there.
I think the one thing that I keep coming back to that does give me a bit of confidence is that when they said that Tears of the Kingdom was going to be $70 and that they felt that the game justified its cost, I think it did. Right? I think that game is exceptional and it has so much content and so much to offer that it was definitely worth the $70 price of admission. So hopefully we will feel that way when we actually play the game, and the Direct just did not communicate that well. But there's a ton of reason to, as we've said, to doubt that. So we'll see what happens. The news about this physical tax is the worst for you if you're an amiibo hunter, because we're seeing a massive price increase here, out of nowhere, right? We're seeing a $10 price hike across the board, which if you're looking at those Street Fighter 6 amiibo that got shown off at the reveal event that were they're a little taller, they were already more expensive, they're going to be $40 a pop now, which is crazy. And the Tears of the Kingdom champion amiibo that are coming out, which is wave 2 of the Tears of the Kingdom stuff, are the standard amiibo, right, which have made their way up to $20 over the years, are now going to be $30, which has now just totally priced me out of picking them up.
So this is in response to tariffs, presumably, right?
Yeah. It's not we haven't had a statement from Nintendo that this is a price increase or a new suggested price. It's that U.S. retailers are increasing the price in response to tariffs.
So as a diehard amiibo collector, if I were to turn off this gorgeous Waluigi background, which I will never do, but if I were to, you would see a cabinet full of mostly boxed amiibo that I've been collecting over the past 8 years. I feel kind of similarly. It's figuring out, okay, we have to make this money back somewhere. Amiibo are not a must-have accessory, as much as I hate to admit it. And it's for $30 amiibos are for adults with disposable income and cash to blow who are it's not going to be a major hit to buy a $30 amiibo. And because of that, thinking about where they could have put that tax, I think I'm okay with it. Look, it's very frivolous, optional stuff for the most diehard people with the most money to blow. I'm devastated. Do not get me wrong.
Look, morally you might be correct, but I can't stomach this, Jack. I can't stomach this. It hurts so bad.
You can't agree with the take. That's kind of my gut impression of it.
I'm just saying,
I'm just
man.
Glad.
To get this set of amiibo, right? Which is I already have all the Tears of the Kingdom ones. I want the full set. It's $120. That would have bought 9 amiibo.
I know. Yeah, they were already kind of teetering on insane before this news.
$20 was already, I was feeling
they've been going up, up and up. And the reason, the justification that I've held on to is a lot of the amiibos that I buy for $18, $20, they hold their resale value at a minimum. Some of them that I own are worth $80, $90 easily on eBay, the rarer ones.
Yeah.
At $30, I don't think we're going to see that. resale value because they're going to be rotting on shelves. No one's going to want them. I think it's kind of the early death of Amiibo.
Which I know, and I'm so upset about that because I really was very excited by the fact that in the Direct they announced new Amiibo, and it seemed like they were recommitting to the idea that they were gonna continue to be a thing. And I worry that this is gonna be the death blow for them and other accessories like them.
I just looked it up, right? You can get a copy of Street Fighter 6 new for $30 on Amazon. You're telling me the Amiibo is more than the game itself?
$10 more, yeah, that's right.
That's wild.
And I mean, $30 for a figurine is not bad at all. Depending on the figurine, that might be a great deal. For an Amiibo, which is, a plasticky kind of entry-level figurine, it's absurd.
Well, I think with that in mind,
it's especially bad when you consider the fact that you are, if you're a weirdo like us, right? I want the set, right? I want to have the whole set, right? It's not that I'm buying one here. If I was a normal person and bought one here or there every time my favorite game had one or whatever, then yeah, maybe you could swallow that. But if you're the people like us that I think are the lifeblood keeping Amiibo alive, this is a lot, man. I can't be doing that.
To my point, though, Pete, I feel like they kind of know that. And I feel like it's kind of been the case for a while that what continues to make Amiibo make sense for Nintendo is that there's a very loyal minority of very nerdy adults who will buy whatever they perceive as completing their Amiibo collection, whether it's a set or whatever it is. So I feel like they kind of know that you and I can afford it, and they don't really care that, the average, maybe first grader Street Fighter fan who just wants Ryu or whatever it is going to be priced out. I don't think it's really their strategy at this point. So I don't know. For me, I'm with you. I'm priced out. I'm not paying $120 for a set of any piece of plastic. So
no, I can't justify
we'll see how it goes.
Right now.
On the other hand, I think there's plenty of people who will. So I'm a complete coin flip on how I think it'll turn out on the Amiibo front.
Sorry, Ken, I know you've been trying to get a word in edgewise here, but this was the only opportunity I've had in all of Jack's time to talk about Amiibo together. And nobody wants to talk about Amiibo with me because no one else is on my level of
If
sickness.
you own less than 25 Amiibo, I don't want to hear it.
Exactly. I don't respect
I literally own 30 Amiibos still on display on my wall.
Okay, we got a rookie in the house. Fine, speak your mind.
This guy's got 30 Amiibo. Whoa.
Oh my goodness.
Speak your mind, Mr. Week One. Go ahead.
Listen, all I'm saying is I've seen people spend $500 on anime figurines. I hear what you're saying where, yeah, this is a price hike that's going to hit the bottom line, but people are still going to buy it, unless they literally can't afford it, and we go into a recession, which is going to happen. But I digress. That's all I got.
I just think with it's one of those things where with everything coming up, right? I have a finite gaming budget, and I used to be able to divert some of that towards toys and stuff, right? And it's way harder to justify that in your play budget when you're spending $80 on a game, right?
Fair.
That $20 difference that would have been the Amiibo last generation.
Prices have risen, but wages have not.
That's right. So now that we've set the stage, let's try to answer the question: has Nintendo done enough to sell folks on Nintendo Switch 2? But we're going to get into that right after a word from our sponsors. This episode was made with support from listeners like you on patreon.com/flipscreengames. If you enjoy our podcast, supporting us on Patreon will help us spend more time making content and get you access to Patreon exclusive perks like early access to ad-free versions of all of our podcasts, and exclusive content like the twice monthly After Dark podcast, where Steve and I will share funny personal stories, play games with each other, and more. And my daily Patreon show, The Daily Checkpoint, where every day I'll spend at least 10 minutes answering your questions or sharing my off-the-cuff thoughts on what I'm playing and what's going on in the video games industry. If you like what we do and want to go above and beyond to show your support, head over to patreon.com/flipscreengames today. And we're back. So all this week, right? I've been waiting for the announcement that when pre-orders were going to go live. We get the news. I'm excited about it, but I've had this like kind of nagging feeling all week about the fact that like things seem so rocky, right? And I think like if at any time on this show over the last like 2 or so years, if you had asked me like where my confidence level was for what the follow-up to Nintendo Switch 2 would look like, I think I would have, like been very positive, right? I might have hem and hawed a little bit, but I think eventually I would have gotten to the idea that if they play their cards right, they're in a great position, right? And I think like taking a little bit of time this week to compare the context of the Switch's 2017 reveal and release versus what we're looking at in 2025, I just feel like the vibe overall is like decidedly less positive. And I think that there are some like interesting things I feel like I identified that Nintendo had going for them at the time that played into the narrative of success for Nintendo Switch that I wonder if they'll be able to replicate with Nintendo Switch 2. And I'm interested to see how these hit you guys. So the first one I wanted to just throw out is that like I think at that point that was a really desperate period for Nintendo, right? Like going into the Nintendo Switch reveal, they were hungry for a win, right? The Wii U was like their biggest failure in the company's history, like as a games, maker. And, now they're in like a decidedly more stable position, right? They have nearly like $9 billion in cash. They have like $17 billion in like net assets, right? And I think
movies, they got theme parks.
Yeah, they've diversified in a lot of ways.
Nintendo.
Yeah, exactly. I think just generally they are
popping off.
Yeah, they have their hands in more spots and they're being successful across the board, right? Like it's been a really, really decided victory for them this generation. It's been like a very stable base for them to build off of. And I think when you're on top, like you take less risks, you're less aggressive. You don't think about as aggressive a price point, and maybe you act with a little bit more confidence in the name of like making decisions that are safe when it was big swings that led to your big successes.
So like this is the way I see it, right? People buy Nintendo products to buy Nintendo games. Like you say they didn't take any big swings, but like they really didn't need to. We just needed a more powerful Switch, and they did that, and then some with the mouse feature on the new Joy-Cons. You know what I mean? Like I think the camera's kind of gimmicky. I don't think that's going to be a huge success, in my opinion. I could be wrong, but based off the footage I've seen, I'm not a huge fan of the camera. Fuck the camera. But like you're talking about big swings. Let's look at their games. We got the first like 3D like adventure Donkey Kong game that's not side-scrolling since Donkey Kong 64, coming out a month after the game comes out. We got Kirby Air Riders. They freed Sakurai from Smash Gel. You know what I mean? And then, of course, we have like Metroid Prime 4 and the new Pokemon Legends game coming out that, yeah, they're going to be on the OG Switch, but they're going to run at 60 frames per second on the Switch too. So if you've been waiting years for these games, you're going to want to play the definitive version of these games. And if you look at the grand scheme of like what's coming out immediately following the Switch, they have at least 4 big bangers off the top of my head that are coming out this year. So yeah, it's the console itself like going to revolutionize the world the same way the first Switch did? No, like it's you can't capture that kind of lightning in a bottle twice unless they do something real wacky and they didn't want to take the risk. And not for nothing, I'm glad they didn't. But where they can take the risk is like bring back some of those IPs. Like they brought back Kirby Air Riders. Now give me F-Zero. Make sure the next Fire Emblem game slaps. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That's what Nintendo needs to do. And I think they're off to a good start in that regard. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I feel almost identically. I think if like on a gut level, if you ask me yes or no, did they do enough? Yeah, I think they did. Because what we were looking for was, to Ken's point, like a pretty check-the-box sequel. Is the screen bigger? Like, are the graphics better? Is the battery life remotely better.
No.
Lost out on that one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe we didn't get that one. But yes. Is the frame rate better? Whatever. Go down the list. It was a very unenthusiastic, like going down and checking every box. They didn't blow us away. Also, to Ken's point, I think where they have room to grow is just give us some unexpected software, because that's what blew me away with the Switch. Is we got so many first-party games that I was not expecting. In the early years of the console, I would have never predicted that a Fire Emblem game, for example, would be my personal game of the year. Three Houses blew me away.
Yes,
And there are like too many examples of that to name on the Switch one. So I think they did enough to justify a sequel for the console. I think the reception to it is understandably lukewarm right now. I'm very much in that boat. I'm not even 100% sure that I'll be pre-ordering personally, but I think they did enough, and I think that Donkey Kong is a great first step. I'd like to see a lot more like unexpected first-party stuff coming out of them.
So
whatever it is.
Let's talk about that, because that was one of the other items that I feel like I identified that I think was a key to the Switch's success, which was that I don't think people could ignore Breath of the Wild the year that it came out, right? It was arguably the best Zelda game of all time. It was an obvious Game of the Year contender right out of the bat, and not only a Game of the Year contender, but I think the first proper Game of the Year contender from Nintendo in quite some time. And it, was a game that everyone was talking about, and whether you were a Zelda fan or you weren't, it not only was a like refreshing of one of the biggest franchises in gaming history, it was also a real refresh and like kind of breath of fresh air for an extremely popular genre of game, which is the open world third person action adventure game, right? And I think Mario Kart is great, and Mario Kart sells better, right? Like Mario Kart is the best selling. Mario Kart 8 is the best selling game that Nintendo's ever released, and that's great, right? Like a sequel to that game is an exciting thing, and I think that it is something that will sell very well and will be, a game that we are all talking about and excited to play and all those things. But I do wonder if it's enough, because I think that, like it is a game that sells like that and that has that broad scale appeal, but it isn't necessarily a game that like gets, I think the same level of like critical attention, the same level of kind of like, like street cred that like having cool Game of the Year exclusives does. And that's not necessarily like, maybe that doesn't matter, right? But I think that Breath of the Wild had the benefit of being both of those things. Like it was a extremely commercially viable game, and it was a cool, hip Game of the Year style game. And on this, they have a sequel to their best-selling game on a sequel to their best-selling console. And does that maybe run the risk of like having a bit of a sophomore slump and feeling a little samey? Because that's, you used those words to describe it earlier, Jack, that it's like, it looks like a great next Mario Kart. And is that the same thing as, oh, this is a revolutionary thing, not only in its genre, in its franchise, for the console, like across the board, right?
So what's crazy is I think it could have been, like, genuinely, I think it could have been a very different story, even though it's coming out a month later, if in the reveal, Donkey Kong kind of took the place of Mario Kart World as the like system seller focus. Just if you flip those two titles, I feel like it could have been very different. Like Breath of the Wild was not a proven thing. There was a lot of skepticism pre-launch.
Totally.
From what we saw, like from trailers, the open world looked kind of empty, and like we were not sure how that thing was going to look.
But you can get food in the car through the drive-thru. Is that not exciting?
Yeah, but like I think Donkey Kong has that kind of home run potential in a way that Mario Kart World does not. I think it's going to be an excellent Mario Kart again. I can't say that enough, but I don't think it's going to be the game that shocks us and is like a reason to go out. And yeah, like if Donkey Kong was that launch title, a totally like radically different Donkey Kong like we haven't seen. I feel like it could be a different story. So it's interesting that Mario Kart's the one that they chose to push, and additionally the one that they chose to put that premium price tag on, which I feel like is a big source of the kind of lukewarm reception to the reveal as a whole.
So let's talk about price there as well, right? Because I think that was another thing that we talked about a little bit earlier, but I'd love to like offer some hard numbers so it doesn't feel like I'm just speaking, right? Because I think part of Switch's success was definitely what an aggressive pricing strategy they had, right? It made them stand out amongst their competitors, and I think it had a reputation for being a console that was like a really, really great value proposition because the entry price point was low, games were not super expensive, and you know you have like a pretty easy entry point for a lot of the extra bells and whistles type accessories that you might invest in because that price point was so low. And looking at just making some quick comparisons. Nintendo Switch was $100 less than the PlayStation 4 and $200 less than the Xbox One at launch, right? Switch 2's price point, far more comparable to the competition. It costs the same amount as a PlayStation 5 digital edition. It's only $50 cheaper than the Xbox Series X or the PlayStation 5 with a disc drive. And it's as much as $200 more expensive than the Xbox Series S, which obviously that has a ton of caveats, but if we're comparing it just pound for pound with other current gen systems, right, as a price point, it in no way comes out on top as a more affordable option, as a cheaper alternative, as a budget entry point for kids. None of those things. It checks none of those boxes now. And then when you talk about the accessory pricing, right, like if you were going to pick up some of the like common day one accessories, some of the stuff that they've been very heavily advertising, like I mentioned earlier, I think you're looking at sticker shock on some of this stuff, right? If you bought yourself an extra pair of Joy-Cons, a Pro Controller, a camera, and then the carrying case screen protector combo, the cheaper one that's $40, that's $835 before taxes, right? So
yeah, if you're buying all that, you kind of deserve it.
So, okay, fine.
I know that you got it. It's
let's-
like, it is what it is.
And I thought you might say that, Jack. So let's limit that to one extra controller purchase, a set of Joy-Cons, so that you can actually play multiplayer Mario Kart, which is the game that you will have to play day and date with your friends. And if you don't have a friend that owns a Nintendo Switch 2 who's going to bring them over, you need a second set of Joy-Cons. Otherwise, you're playing with one friend at a time, which is not what they're selling you on,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
So let's assume you buy that, and we nix the camera, and we just get the carrying case and the screen protector, the cheapest option, right? So that you can actually play Mario Kart and not scratch the shit out of your screen and have a place to put it. $634.
Yeah.
Better, but when you compare that to the original Switch, right? Like the original Switch was $300, Pro Controller's $70, Joy-Cons are $80, original carrying case was $20, right?
Yeah.
So that entire bundle is $469.96, making it less expensive than just literally getting your hands on the console this time around.
Yeah. I'll add the caveat that the accessory like major price hike could be very temporary. We don't know.
Yeah,
Like that
that's
could
true.
change next month.
Or it could go up.
Yeah, price I
That's
didn't
true
really
too.
touch on.
That 90-day period could end and it could go up.
So let me split my answer. Do I think Nintendo did enough for the Switch 2 to set the Switch 2 up to be a success? Yes. Do I think they set it up to be the like global phenomenon that the Switch 1 was? No, I don't at all. Because you're boxing out so many like subsets of customer. You're boxing out the kids that are like kind of interested, all their friends have one. So like I'll ask for it for my birthday. It's too expensive for a lot of families. You're boxing it out as a multiple device per household thing, I think. Not uncommon for a brother and a sister to have a Switch at $450 plus like entry price and then getting into everything you're saying, right? That's a very different story than two $300 devices or $250, whatever the Switch Lite was. So I think there's kind of two stories to it. And I agree that the price is going to pave a very different path for the Switch 2 than the Switch 1. Its success is not going to be rooted in being the device for every single family, possibly multiple devices per family. It's going to be a different, revenue strategy.
And I guess maybe that's part of their plan, right? Because like they obviously like heavily advertise like game sharing, and there's a lot of like, hey, like you don't need to buy 2 copies of every game, and you can like share copies across multiple devices and things like that.
Yeah, but who has $1,000 to own 2 Switch 2s in their house? It's a great, right? That's a great feature. It's an innovative feature. No one else, to my knowledge, does that.
Not in that way.
Not in that way that Nintendo is proposing, but it's kind of at odds with the very steep entry price of the console.
Yeah, I agree. I think the kind of last note I want to bring up here, right, is that like I agree with you, right? Like I don't necessarily have concerns about the long-term viability of Switch 2 as a platform or anything like that, but I think it feels very reminiscent to me of the blunder that we saw PlayStation make with the PS2 to the PS3 era, and then, maybe more relevant to our example today, the DS to the 3DS, right? Where it's like you look at, both of those consoles, right? Like the successors are, better and bigger and more powerful and have more features and all those things in every way. But the only thing people like more than that is something that they can afford. and I think that is, you can look at both of those consoles and they both were success stories in the long run, right? Like the PlayStation 3 was able to like close the gap and eventually overtake the Xbox 360. The 3DS was able to, carve out a niche for itself as a totally like celebrated successor to that console, and it's like stumble out the gate and early price cut and all that stuff is a relatively small part of its narrative. But while the PlayStation 3 was able to, eventually kind of overtake and come in first place, like, both of the two of them massively undersold the consoles that they were preceded by.
The PS3 did not. It never like recovered in that generation's race to being the dominant console. The 360 ran circles around it in terms of sales.
Until the end of the console, it ended up pulling ahead in all-time lifetime sales.
Yeah, because
at the very end.
Sony also supports their stuff forever and does not stop releasing. Like, software support does not end for. I'm pretty sure there's new PS2 games coming out to this day. Not positive, but
to your point, they dominated that entire generation, right? And I think that like looking at both of those as like consoles that had to stumble out the gate and then had to like work against that to like right the ship and like adjust that narrative, they happened, but they came at great cost and effort.
Yeah, and I think when you look at a $450 price tag and think about like why would they price it so aggressively in their favor? Because it leaves room for a $400 price slash to be celebrated. And like, now it's a no-brainer to get a Switch 2. Whereas if it was priced at $400, that's what we were all expecting. And we'd say, oh, cool, it costs what we expected. If you were going to get one, you'll still get one. If you weren't interested, you're not interested. I think now it leaves room for like a new reduced price Switch 2. So.
No, and that's the thing, right? With a handful of exceptions, like a Black Friday deal here and there, the Switch never got a price cut. It's still $300. You know what I mean? And I don't think we should expect any type of price cut on the Switch 2 because they're like, well, if you can't afford a Switch 2, you can just buy a Switch 1. And it's like they have one for like every price point. You got the Switch Lite, the Switch, OLED Switch, Switch 2, essentially.
Yeah, it's a good, like the Switch 1's not an irrelevant device the day the Switch 2 launches, which is kind of unique.
Like that console's gonna get support for years to come. Whereas when the
probably at least
Switch
2 years, right?
I would say longer, in my opinion. I would probably say
you have to think about the gargantuan, like
base.
unimaginable size of the install base. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know though. I mean, like
whatever minimal support they kick it, like it's still gonna translate into pretty meaningful revenue compared to
for sure
any past example you could point to, at least.
Yeah, you're definitely right about that. I wouldn't be surprised, I guess, if some of the smaller titles, like stuff like, like we keep talking about those games like the Princess Peach Showtime or like Zelda Echoes of Wisdom or, like the Mario 2D games, stuff like that. I think that you could probably see those games still come to Switch, but like I think most of their like big, AAA games are
I'm not even saying new support. I'm saying keep the eShop alive on the Switch One, and you'll still see like
I think the Switch One
for some time to come.
Yeah, I think the Switch One's going to get support similar to how the PS4 got support when the PS5 came out. God of War Ragnarok came out on PS4 and PS5.
Sure.
Horizon Forbidden West came on the PS4 and the PS5.
Yeah, we already have that line drawn though with a couple games,
Yeah.
Metroid Prime, Pokemon Legends.
So like it wouldn't surprise me if, unless it's a game that can only run on the Switch 2, I think they're going to milk that 2 for as long as they can.
My point is, I think that the number of games that will be able to run on both will trickle to a halt in a similar amount of time as we've seen with like they supported the 3DS for like 2 or 3 years into the Switch's life cycle, right? Like you're definitely right. Games will continue to come to it. I just wonder where that cutoff is, right? Because the teams that are working on those like more like AA style games, like those could probably run on Switch for a couple more years. But I think the Switch is also an 8-year-old console that was old tech when it was new. So its age is, I think increasingly a problem for sure.
True.
I was expecting people to notice though, like 5 years ago. And when you read like whatever popular Nintendo Switch forum, go on Reddit, the Nintendo Switch Reddit, like it's still people so jazzed about their Nintendo Switch, in a very surprising way. I don't think it's something the vast majority of Switch owners, even to this day, are like, wow, this thing's really feeling dated and slow and funky.
Yeah, I that's maybe more a question for the developers, right? Like if they feel like they're ready to move on or not.
Yeah, all that to say, I think Nintendo just has so much more wiggle room to feel this one out and like let the higher price tag play out over the course of a year. And unless like it's an abyssal failure, which I don't expect, I don't think any of us expect that. I don't see any drastic changes to what they're doing.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I mean, analysts seem to think that they have factored in the reduction in number of people with the increase in price. And
yeah, I think they're okay with that, and they're so built to survive that. Like less initial interest than the Switch One.
Yeah, definitely. And to the point we talked about earlier, they have a ton of cash reserves. They have, alternate revenue streams that they can enjoy right over these next couple of years that like if there is a, maybe a relatively slower adoption rate because of any of the factors that we talked about, they're going to get another cash injection next year when the next Mario movie comes out. And they'll get another cash injection, in a week or whatever when the Florida Universal Park opens up and they start getting all that merch revenue. And, so yeah, I think you're probably right that even if it's not able to, immediately like cement itself as like a clear, successor in terms of like matching Nintendo Switch's sales, that, they're far more poised to weather the storm this time around if they need to make adjustments. And we've seen them do that in the past, right? Like they had to aggressively adjust the pricing of like the Super Nintendo multiple times because of the price where they were in with Sega, right? And it's like sometimes the market dictates those changes. And I think, the Nintendo Switch was again an outlier, right? It never needed a price reduction because the demand for it never stopped. And that's kind of unheard of.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the Switch 2 has kind of some built-in safety nets. Like it has the emergency back pocket, or even it might be like a mid-generation plan. We have the Switch 2 OLED now, and the original Switch is now, or the original Switch 2 is now $400.
Yeah.
It feels like it might be built into their plan that currently some people are boxed out in a way that they don't plan to be the case forever.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. It'll be interesting to see, because I know that there are a lot of analysts that are still pretty bullish that they think it's going to sell more units in its first year than the Switch did, because of that point that Ken made, that they're just like more available, and that like because the Switch is such a known quantity that, you know, there are millions of us who are ready to upgrade, and that, you know, it might not be a chink in its armor at all.
Yeah,
we'll see. We'll see soon enough, right?
Yeah. In summary,
well, folks, happy hunting this week. I hope that you are all able to get your Nintendo Switch 2 pre-orders. Godspeed to all of us. And if you are one of our European listeners who already has your Nintendo Switch 2 pre-order, make sure you go and put out a couple of cookies for Miyamoto for us, and maybe light some incense and give us some of your Spirit Bomb energy, and hopefully we all luck out come tomorrow. All right, folks.
Let's go.
Thank you for joining us here on another episode of Nintendo Noise. Remember, if you want to get involved in the community, you want to check out what we're doing, you want to write in and get your thoughts read on the air, you can do all that and more at flipscreen.games. That's our website where you can get all the places we are all over the web. However you want to get involved with the show or the community, you can do it there. Flipscreen.games. Go over there, click on some stuff, helps us out a lot. And I would love to extend a very special thank you to our Patreon producers for the month of April. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valenz, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, a.k.a. Asobi, Project Julian, Steve Stompy, Susan Still Likes Cats and Also Boobies, That One Kid Nick, Ty the Dude, Voodoo Vic, and Waka Hula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/flipscreengames. You all the realest of the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. For the crew, I've been Pete, he's been Ken, he's been Jack. We'll see you next week. Woo.